So now let us start the confrontation of this great perplexity. To open the innings, as it were, we have with us this morning an authentic mind, Dr. Mary Ann Layden. Dr. Layden is a psychotherapist and director of education at the Center for Cognitive Therapy at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the director of the Sexual Trauma and Psychopathology program there. She specializes in the treatment of sexual violence victims and perpetrators, as well as sex addicts and those engaged in the sexual exploitation industry. And by that we mean those engaged in pornography, in stripping, sex trafficking, and prostitution. She conducts research examining the connection between the sexual exploitation industry, sexual violence, and sexual pathology. She has testified before the U.S. Congress on 5 occasions and spoken at 1 congressional briefing, all focused on issues of sexual violence, sexual addiction, the sexual exploitation industry, and the media. She has lectured extensively both in the United States and abroad on cognitive therapy, childhood and adult sexual trauma, sexual addiction, and the sexual exploitation industry. I think we are very, very happy and very lucky to have with us the extremely busy Dr. Mary Ann Layden. Please welcome her.
It's really wonderful to be here with other people who care. I feel like I'm among my tribe. Hold on, I'm trying to get my phone to tell me how long I'm talking. Nope. Okay, it won't do it. Never mind. I can't get my phone to work. Give me a signal. So I'm going to talk today about the public health issue of both the sexual exploitation industry and sexual violence, hoping that you'll see the interconnection between all of them and get a sense of how all this works together, with pornography as being the fuel that's burning the fire. And so I guess we have no clicker today, but we got slides? Give me slides. That's not the first slide? That's about the 9th slide. Can we go back to the beginning? Okay, there we are. Okay. So, and if anyone would like these slides, please email me and I'll send them all to you. So, the public health crisis. Next slide, please. We're going to look at, first, why is it a public health crisis? Because it affects a broad range of people. That's the first thing. Secondly, it has many negative effects, and we're going to talk about just some of them, but they're a broad range of effects. Can't be solved by an individual. Not one of you on your own can completely protect your home, your family, even your community. It takes a broad range of individuals. Other institutions are needed to help solve this problem. So we're going to need the government, educational, medical, mental health professionals. We're going to need the family, the home, the school, the church, all of them to work together. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take the point of view that the society has become pornified. Next slide. So what I mean is that we've now decided, and this is worldwide, that sex is a product and that the body is a commodity. We're now involved in buying and selling these things, sex and the body. Our most precious activity, which produces human life, is now a commodity for sale. Next slide. Now, if it's a product and you can sell it, then you can also steal it. Next slide. Selling it is the sexual exploitation industry. That's where we sell it. Stealing it is sexual violence. And these are interconnected. Next slide. What I mean by the sexual exploitation industry are pornography, strip clubs, prostitution, sex trafficking. Next. What I mean by sexual violence is sexual harassment, adult rape, child rape, and incest. Next. And what I'm going to say is that the sexual exploitation industry and sexual violence are a seamless, interconnected continuum. There is no bright line of demarcation one to the next. They are interconnected. They are all of the same fabric. Next. So we're going to talk about learning because what you learn, what you believe is the best predictor of your behavior. So we want to know what is it you're learning and who's teaching it to you. Next. First, a couple of factors about learning. Pictures are the best carriers and the most compact carriers of meaning. Next, learning is deeper and more if we're rewarded for the behavior. Learning is deeper if we have role models who are showing us how to do things. Next slide. Learning is deeper in the presence of arousal. So if we're aroused when we're learning something, we're learning it better. And then antisocial behavior is more likely when we're feeling anonymous. Next slide. So these factors, pictures, rewards, role models, aroused, and anonymous, are in fact the absolute factors that are involved in internet pornography. They have pictures, they are usually looking at those pictures when you're aroused and you're using sexual arousal as a reward. We have role models showing behavior, and people feel anonymous when they're on there. Next. Then we add the internet factors. Much of the pornography on the internet starts out free. It's available everywhere. It's available all the time. And children often know better how to get to it than adults do. And I've talked to parents where I've said even something like, do you check the history of where your children are going to on the internet? And some parents say, the what? Like, oh my goodness, your children know how to get to these things. And the pornographers are targeting them. The pornographers know how to get to your children. So the children are knowing better about this whole, how the internet works. Next. So the internet pornography, because of those factors, is actually a perfect learning environment. It's got all the factors that make it a perfect learning environment. Next. Except for the fact that everything it tells you is a lie. So it would be a great teacher, except that everything it tells you is a lie. Next. This is why the psychologists now call the internet pornography the new crack cocaine. And it is, in fact, more damaging than crack cocaine. And I do have to treat some cocaine addicts. But when I'm treating the pornography addicts, it is harder to get a pornography addict into remission than it is to get a cocaine addict into remission. And it is more likely that the pornography addict is going to relapse than it is that the cocaine addict is going to relapse. So this is actually tougher. And let me just say, when we're working with the cocaine addict or the heroin addict or any other kind of addict of that sort, the first step in that treatment is to get that addictive substance out of their system. They have to go to detox, clean out the heroin, clean out the cocaine. How do you clean out the pornography? It's in your brain. It's in your brain forever. It's the first time we've been asked to treat an addictive process where the addictive substance is permanently implanted in your brain. So this is a whole new kind of addiction that we are finding very challenging to treat. Next. Now, if pornography is teaching us something, what is it that it's teaching us? And the first factor that it's teaching next is called permission-giving beliefs. Next. Pornography produces these kind of permission-giving beliefs. And these are beliefs that say what I'm doing is normal, that it doesn't hurt anybody, that everybody is doing it. All of these beliefs give you permission to use this material. Therefore, I don't need to change, because if everybody's using it and it doesn't hurt anybody and it's perfectly normal, I don't need to change it at all. And that belief is a trigger for use. And that anybody who has a problem with my behavior, they're crazy, they're prudish, they're wrong. All of us on the stage and all of us who fight this get called very strange names. Next slide. Some permission-giving beliefs that we find, and I find this in my treatment, I've heard this from patients. One is that all men go to prostitutes. Interesting belief system, but of course allows you to go to a prostitute. All people want sex with all people all the time. Women like to be raped. Women enjoy degrading sex. Children like sex with adults. I remember the first person who told that to me. Children like sex with adults? How do you know that? Well, I see the pictures on the internet of the smiling children having sex with adults. Like, oh my goodness. That taught you that children like to have sex with adults because you saw a picture that made it look like that child was smiling. And one of the problems we have in the United States is that we have internet in our libraries, and you can go in our libraries where, if the libraries are not filtered, and download child pornography in the library. And I've had pedophiles say to me, how bad can this child pornography be? You can get it at the library. That's a permission-giving belief. If you can get it at the library, then it must be fine. Next slide. So we're going to have miseducation about sexuality. Next. It's going to tell you these kind of messages. These are the messages of pornography about sexuality. Sex is not about intimacy, caring, love, or respect. None of that is happening in pornography. None of that is happening. Sex is not about marriage and having children. None of that's happening in pornography. Sex is recreational. You don't need to know your partner. Stranger sex is the most intense kind of sex, the best kind of sex. Now, all these things are lies, but this is what pornography is teaching you. Next. It's telling you that sex is adversarial. It's saying that pornography it tells you that sex is a one-way street. It's just focused on your own pleasure. You don't have to think about anybody else's pleasure. It's not important what she's feeling. It's only important what you're feeling. It teaches narcissism. Sex is a male entitlement. I have a right to it. That's a releaser for certain behaviors. Men need sex. I say, you mean like air or water, like they die if they don't have it? You mean like that? Oh. And that women's bodies are sexual entertainment for men. Next. So internet pornography tends to be designer sex, where you just click and click and click until you get the image that you want at the time. And this is a very perverted kind of sex, because real women are not so clickable. You can't just, change this body part out and put this other body part in. And it sends a terrible message about what sexuality is supposed to be. Next. Pornography includes performers that never say no. What happens when you get the message, women never say no? Increases your unrealistic expectations about others, gives you that message about entitlement to sex, includes frustration when others do say no, and reduces your ability to notice the signal that somebody is saying no. Next. Now, from this point on, I'm going to talk about some of the research findings. First, I'm going to talk about thinking effects, and then we'll talk about behavioral effects. So all of these things that I'm going to mention are findings from research on males who use pornography. Next. So that men who use pornography will say things such as, women enjoy rape, she got what she wanted when she was raped, women make false accusations of rape, more acceptance of rape myth, and rapists deserve less time in prison. Next. So this is what that graph looks like. We're showing people in this particular study, males, some pornographic imagery. The first group saw no pornographic imagery. The second group saw half of their imagery was pornographic. The third group saw all of their imagery is pornographic. And then we say, how much time should a rapist spend in jail? And you can see the number of months go down as each group saw more and more porn. There is a direct linear reduction in how much time they think a rapist should spend in jail. I think they think rape is not such a bad thing. What happens when we teach our males that rape is not a bad thing? Next slide. They tend to have an adversarial view of sex, and they have more sexually callous beliefs. Next. And this is what that graph looks like. Look at the increase in callousness. And let me say, in this study, the amount of pornography they showed, or the amount of imagery they showed each group, was 4 hours and 48 minutes total over this. So this was not what we currently think of as a huge amount of pornography. But you get this increase in callousness over just that much. Next. Men who use pornography are actually increasing their estimates of how many people in the society are doing things such as group sex, or sex with animals, or sex with violence. Next. This is the one that looks at sex with violence. You can see as they show them, and this pornography that they saw didn't have any violence in it, but you ask them, how many people in the country are including violence in their sexual activity? And you can see the direct linear increase in how often they think others are doing this. And if they think others are doing it, they are much more likely to do it themselves. Next. So they're more accepting of violence against women. They use more sexual terms to describe women. They see women as sex objects, have reduced support for the women's liberation movement. Next. So this is what this graph looks, and look how quickly they reduce their support for women's liberation. The drop down is dramatic. Next. They rate their partners as less attractive. They're less satisfied with their partner's sexual performance because their partners are not doing all kinds of pornified sex. Next. Greater desire for sex without emotional involvement. What happens when we teach people that emotional involvement and sex are not connected? Think of the implications in the society for that. Greater acceptance of sex outside of marriage for married individuals. So when we ask them, are you going to be faithful when you're married? They say no. They don't expect themselves to be faithful in marriage. What's the impact of that? Greater acceptance of sex before marriage, less child-centered in marriage, and less desiring of female children. Next slide. More willing to have sex with 13 and 14-year-olds. These now become appropriate partners in their mind. 13 and 14-year-olds. More sexually attracted to children. Less likely to think that pornography needs to be restricted from children. Next slide. This is what that graph looks like. When you ask them, do we need to keep pornography away from children? You can see how quickly those who have been shown pornography think we do not need to keep it away from children. Their thoughts that this damages children go way down. Next. The increasing use of pornography causes an increase in higher psychopath scores. From my own research, these were young college males, freshman year to senior year in college. Those who increased their pornography use by senior year had higher scores on a measure of psychopath. I'm thinking these porn sites are making money by teaching our boys to think like psychopaths. What happens to the society when we do that? Next. So now we're going to talk about the behavioral. Those were attitude changes, and those are scary. Here are the behavioral changes. Next. First, pornography says it's going to give you a great sex life, but what it gives you is erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, and retarded ejaculation. So it actually makes you unable to perform sexually. And in one study, these were males, average age 25 years old, users of porn. 58% had sexual dysfunction. Like, this used to be a senior citizen problem. Okay, next slide. They have more sex partners. They're less attracted to their sex partners. They're less interested in actual sex with their partners because that erectile dysfunction only shows up when they are actually trying to have sex with a person, not when they're interacting with pixels on a screen. So they're not so interested in sex with a person because they only sexually function with pixels. Can't have sex with people, only with pixels. They try to get their sex partners to act out images in pornographic films. They're trying to get their partners to do what they've seen. Next. Here's the behavioral outcome of the attitude that we saw in the last set. When they're married, they do have affairs. Now, they told us earlier in terms of their attitude, I'm not going to be faithful, and when they are married, they're not faithful. Attitude and behavior completely in sync. And they're more likely to go to prostitutes. Next slide. In my own research, when I asked college males, and these were 19 to 21-year-old males, have you prostituted a woman yet, or do you plan to in the future? 25% of them said yes. 25% of our young males say, I will do this, or I've already done this. Next. The more pornography these males used, the more likely they were to have gone to a prostitute. So these things are hooked. Using the pornography, going to the prostitute. It's all interconnected. I hope you're going to get the message. It's a seamless interconnection. It's all interconnected. Next. Males who go to strip clubs are more likely to engage in non-consenting sex, and that's also connected to pornography use. All interconnected. Next. Men who use pornography are more likely to engage in behavioral aggression. They're more likely to sexually abuse their partners who they battered. And let me look at the next slide to show you the battering results. Next. So if they batter their partner, if they're engaged in domestic violence, if they're using pornography, they're 2 times as likely to, in fact, sexually abuse her as well. So she's battered and sexually abused. If it's pornography and alcohol, 3 times as likely to sexually abuse the partner as well. So there's an interconnection between the battering and the sexual violence. Next. They use violent sexual fantasies to get themselves aroused, and in that study, they were only presented with one presentation of sex mixed with violence, and then when they were asked to arouse themselves by using mental imagery, the imagery they used was violence. It is very easy to get violence to be sexy. The sexual template is spread quickly and very easily with the reward of the sexual arousal. More likely to sexually harass women. Next. More likely to engage in date rape, stranger rape, marital rape. Next. More likely to verbally coerce sex, physically coerce sex, and use drugs and alcohol to coerce sex. Next. The earlier the male children are exposed to pornography, the more likely they are to engage in non-consenting sex, and we see the age dropping and dropping and dropping. I heard that this morning. Next. Those who do research on sexual violence have named 3 factors that predict sexual violence. First, hostility toward women. Next, the belief that sex is a casual, non-intimate, recreational, adversarial behavior. And third, the use of pornography. Those are the 3 factors that predict sexual violence. I believe all those factors are actually connected to the use of pornography. It produces hatred against women. It produces the belief that sex is recreational and adversarial. and non-intimate, and then, of course, the use of pornography. All of it's interconnected with pornography. Next. The statistics, The statistics in the United States are horrific. 1 in 8 women are raped. 25% of our college females, during the 4 years they're in college, will either have a rape or an attempted rape. 50% of women are sexually harassed on their jobs at some point in their lifetime. And in the U.S., by the time a female is 18 years old, 38% of them have been sexually molested. We have a sexual tsunami. Next. Can I have the next slide? These are some statistics about the Caribbean. It's sort of hard to see this, but in fact, I can't even see it on my own notes. My notes are small. Trinidad is the one second from the bottom of, I think if I can see this, that says, can you read that? Third from the bottom. So you see in the Caribbean the frequency of rape per 100,000 population, and all of these are above the world average. All of these are above the world average. Next. Now, lest you think it only affects men, here's the effects on women. Next. Women who use pornography are more likely to accept the rape myth and all those mythology statements about rape, more likely to have sexual fantasies that involve rape. Next. More likely to also believe that rapists deserve less time in prison. The women think rapists deserve less time in prison. Next. Look at the graph. Here's the women's data dropping down dramatically on how many months a rapist needs to spend in jail. What happens when women think rape is not a bad thing? We see that attitude where we're sort of casual and accepting of that kind of effect. Next. They have reduced support for the women's liberation movement. Next slide. Here's the women's attitude toward women's liberation, dropping right down. So it's not just men, it's women. It's affecting them both. Next. They have more negative attitudes about their body, think that their partner's more critical of their body, which their partner is, because the surgically enhanced women in the pornography don't look like real women, don't look like your actual partner. And the women are having less sex. Next. From my own research, what I found was that young women who use pornography were more likely to be victims of non-consenting sex. So that the women are getting victimized, and I think it's because they are accepting this kind of pornified behavior out of their partners, not noticing signals of this kind of pornified behavior. The women have accepted it and now are becoming victims more often. Next. Now, lest we just think it's men and women, here's what we know about the kids. Next. So children who are exposed to all kinds of sexualized media, not just pornography, but all kinds of sexualized media, what we find is that they're more likely to engage in oral sex, more likely to engage in anal sex, more likely to engage in sexual intercourse. Next. More likely to have negative attitudes toward using a condom, have not used contraception during their last intercourse, have not used contraception in the last 6 months. Next. Have an earlier initiation of sex, so they're starting sexual activity earlier and earlier. There's a catastrophe happening. Have more sex partners while they're still minors. Have had more than one sex partner in the last 3 months. Have had sex more frequently. Next slide. Have a strong desire to conceive and are more likely to get pregnant. And so these are children having babies. Next. They are also more likely to engage in sexual harassment, more likely to engage in non-consenting sex. We have a dramatic increase in children sexually assaulting other children. And when you show this pornography to children and say, this is how we do it, they will do it like that. Next slide. More likely to test positive for chlamydia, so they're getting sexually transmitted diseases as one of the outcomes. More likely to use alcohol and other substances in their last sexual encounter, have higher sexual permissiveness scores, have less progressive gender roles and attitudes. Next. Now, lest we think it's just the men, women, and the children who are affected, here's what happens to the people who are in the sexual exploitation industry. These are the performers. Next. This is what goes on, and I'm sorry about this language, but this is what goes on in the strip clubs. When we ask strippers, what have you experienced? They've said, I'm verbally abused, sorry about the language, I'm called cunt, I'm called whore, I'm called bitch, my arm is grabbed, my breast is grabbed, my buttocks are grabbed. Next slide. My hair is pulled, I'm pinched, I'm slapped, I'm bitten. Customers flick cigarettes and ice and coins at me. Customers follow me home. Customers stalk me. I don't think that this is a job. I don't think that this is an industry. I think this is sexual abuse for money. Next. Unless you think it's only the customers who's doing this to the strippers, here's what the managements are doing. The managers are verbally abusing the strippers. The managers are calling them cunt, slut, bitch, pinching, and slapping them. Sexual abuse for money by the management. Next. The women who get caught in the sexual exploitation industry have about a 25% chance of making a marriage that will last as long as 3 years. Now, our statistics on marriage dissolving are horrific, but a whole group of people who can't get their marriage to last longer than 3 years. Now, if you would think that sex is making for good sex lives and good relationships, you would think these would have the best sex lives and the best relationships. They have the worst. Next. Prostitution is a special form of the sexual exploitation industry. Next. The statistics on what happens to the prostituted women are horrific. First, homelessness at a high rate. Next. Sexually abused as a child. And those are the two things that are the most predictive of who will be prostituted in the society, that they've been sexually abused as a child and that they've been homeless. Those two things are in the histories of the prostituted women. Next. Statistics on how many of them are physically assaulted and how many are physically assaulted by a customer. These statistics are horrific. Next. How many have had head injuries inflicted on them by a customer? Is this a job? If 77% of them have head injuries inflicted by a customer? Next. Threatened with a weapon? Next. What about the murder rate? Well, in one study it was 29%, in another study it was 100%. 40 times higher than other women. Next. Drug abuse problems, alcohol abuse, long duration of these problems. And I've said, for these women who engage in this kind of activity, they either have to be drunk, high, or dissociated to do what they do, because it's an assault on them. And for them to go do daily what they do, they have to not be in their bodies. Next slide. Raped as a prostitute, raped more than 5 times as a prostitute. These numbers are horrific. Next. Not surprisingly, they've got post-traumatic stress, and many of them want to commit suicide. Next. Their statistics on their mental health is devastating. How many of them are depressed? How many of them are substance abusing? How many of them have serious psychiatric problems? Next. No wonder so many of them want to get out of it. And yet we hear in the United States myths that women do it because they like sex, or they, it's the victimless crime. I don't think it's a victimless crime. I think they're victims. Next slide. These are some pictures that are taken by the vice officer in Denver, and they are 8 mugshots in a row. The first mugshot was the first time she was arrested for being prostituted, and as you go across the top and then go across the bottom, you get to the 8th time she was arrested for being prostituted. The time frame from first picture to last picture is less than 2 years. You see her dissolving as a person? Next slide. Do you see the humanity leaving quickly? And this is an interesting young woman. She was 18 years old in that first picture. In her 8th arrest, the bottom there, she's still 18 years old. In less than 1 year, this is what happened to her in this victimless crime, in this consenting adults, in this women are doing it because they like sex. Does she look like she's been having a lot of good sex for a year? Next slide. All of these women show devastation, some of it physical, some of it psychological. Next. You can see that they're bruised, they're beaten. Next. Their soul is lost. Next. 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 It puts to the lie that this is somehow an industry that we should tolerate. Next. In the United States, the typical age for first being prostituted is 13. This is sexual abuse of children for money. This is rape of a child for money. Next. So why do they do it? Next. They do it because they have permission-giving beliefs. Men tell themselves it's okay. They tell themselves it's okay. They say that these things are all right. They've seen them in the pornography. They've seen other people do it. They've seen people in pornography get rewarded for this, and they tell themselves it's all right. Next. We see sexual entitlement. It's my right. We see the belief that sex is a need. We see that my pleasure is more important than someone else's pain. We see that they say it doesn't actually cause anybody a problem. That's the denial factor. And then they somehow mush all of these together, and I hear these from the patients. I have a right to meet my needs in the most pleasurable way possible because it doesn't hurt anybody, and even if it hurts somebody, that's okay. Like, wait a minute, I thought it didn't hurt anybody, now it's okay that it hurts. It's like, oh my goodness, the pretzel that they've got their brain in. Next. When you ask these men who prostitute women, what do they think the prostituted person is feeling, they say she's got positive feelings. The prostituted woman says that's not true, but they believe that. Next. When we look at research on the parts of the brain that men use when they're looking at women in these sexualized things, and this particular area of research just shows mildly sexualized pictures to men and women and asks them, just to look at the picture. When we are looking at men in slightly sexualized imagery, we use the part of our brain that processes humans and human faces. We look at men, we use humans and human faces, part of our brain. When we look at women in sexualized imagery, we use the part of our brain that processes tools and objects, not the part of our brain that processes humans or human faces. So when we're treating women like a tool or an object, when they are in fact a sex object, we use the rules that we use for tools when we are interacting with women. If it doesn't do its job, throw it away, get another one. Next. And Don Hilton's going to talk about this more. I'm going to mention this. Teen brain, cocaine brain. Their brain does things using pornography that looks the same thing that cocaine does to the brain. They've got problems with their gray matter and less connectivity. Next. We know that sexual arousal, when you are sexually aroused, it blocks the disgust response, so that you will do things when you're sexually aroused that would disgust you otherwise. And when the sexual arousal goes away, when you've completed, the disgust response comes back. This is one reason men beat up and kill prostituted women when they're done. Because now the sexual arousal is done and the disgust response comes back, and now they're giving her head injuries and they're killing her. But all of this, and I'm sorry that my talk today is just about the problems, because tomorrow we're going to talk about the solutions. I want to get to the solutions. I always like to end with Roger Scruton, next slide, who's a philosopher from England. He said, yeah, but the real problem with pornography is that it threatens the loss of love in a world where only love brings happiness. Thank you.